In the courtroom, my sister looked at the judge and declared, "Finally, your house is mine." Our parents clapped with the enthusiasm of thieves securing a prize. I stood frozen, accepting defeat, but the judge stopped shuffling her papers. She looked straight at me and asked a question that froze my sister's smile. "Ms. Robinson, do you know why this agreement surfaced only after the city announced the land buyout project? My name is Chloe Robinson. I am 34 years old, and as I stood in the breathless humidity of the county courthouse, I realized that my entire life had been a long, slow rehearsal for this exact moment of public humiliation. The air in the room was stale, recycled through vents that rattled with a low, mechanical hum, but that noise was nothing compared to the silence radiating from the defense table where I stood alone. On the other side of the aisle, the atmosphere was electric, vibrant with the energy of predators who smell blood in the water. My sister, Kendra Hartman, sat with her posture perfect, her chin tilted up at precisely the right angle to catch the overhead fluorescent lights. She wore a soft, pastel cardigan that I knew cost $300, but looked modest enough to suggest she was a concerned, burdened sibling just trying to do the right thing. She leaned forward, her hands clasped on the mahogany table, and although she spoke to the judge, her voice carried a frequency designed to vibrate straight through my ribcage. "Finally," she said, letting the word hang there like a guillotine blade. "Your house is mine." It was not a legal argument, it was a victory lap. Then, the sound that shattered the decorum of the court happened, behind Kendra, in the gallery benches. Two people began to clap. It was a sharp, staccato sound, devoid of rhythm but full of pride. I did not need to turn around to know who they were. I knew the cadence of that applause. It was my mother, Marianne, and my father, Douglas. They were not clapping politely. They were clapping the way people do at a graduation, or perhaps more accurately, the way investors clap when a merger is finalized. They were applauding the transfer of assets. They were applauding the fact that their golden child had finally wrestled the last piece of autonomy away from the disappointment. The bailiff stiffened. The court reporter's fingers hovered over her stenotype machine. I stood perfectly still. My hands were clenched so tightly at my sides that my fingernails were cutting crescents into my palms. But I refused to flinch. I refused to turn around and give them the satisfaction of seeing the tears that were burning the backs of my eyes. I had learned a long time ago that in the family dynamic of the Robinsons, emotion was a weakness to be exploited. If I cried, I was unstable. If I shouted, I was hysterical. If I stayed silent, I was guilty. There was no winning move. So I chose the one that required the least amount of energy. I chose stone-cold silence. My attorney, a court-appointed fill-in who had spent most of the hearing checking the time on his wristwatch, looked at me with a mixture of pity and annoyance. He had already packed his briefcase mentally. To him, this was a simple domestic dispute, a verbal contract case where the weight of family testimony crushed the solitary defendant. Kendra's lawyer, a man with a smile that looked like it had been sharpened on a whetstone, stood up and buttoned his jacket. He turned to the gallery, acknowledging my parents with a subtle nod, then faced the bench. "Your Honor," he said, his voice smooth and rich like caramel. "The plaintiff rests. The testimony of Mr. and Mrs. Robinson has been clear. The defendant, due to her overwhelming stress and inability to manage the property, agreed verbally to transfer the deed to her sister for safekeeping. We are simply asking the court to enforce that agreement to protect the asset and, frankly, to protect Ms. Robinson from herself." He gestured to me as if I were a broken piece of furniture that needed to be put into storage. I felt the eyes of everyone in the room, the clerks, the bailiff, the few bored strangers in the back row. They saw a woman standing alone, rejected by her own parents, sued by her own sister. They saw a loser, a woman who could not hold her life together, a woman who needed a keeper. For 34 years, my family had been writing my biography for me. They decided I was the responsible one, the boring one, the one who existed to absorb the shockwaves of their drama. They decided I was fragile when it suited them and invisible when it did not. Now, they were trying to write the final chapter. They wanted to write me out of my own home. The judge, the Honorable Eliana Sutter, did not bang her gavel. She did not admonish my parents for their outburst, though her eyes flickered toward them with a cold, avian sharpness. Judge Sutter was a woman of indeterminate age with steel-gray hair, pulled back into a severe bun, and reading glasses perched on the very end of her nose. She had spent the last 20 minutes flipping through the thick file of motions and affidavits, the rhythm of turning pages the only consistent sound in the room, Everyone waited for the ruling. Kendra was already reaching for her purse, her face arranged in a mask of relieved sorrow. My father leaned forward, probably ready to stand up and shake the lawyer's hand, but the pages stopped turning. Judge Sutter froze. Her hand rested on a document near the bottom of the stack. She did not look up immediately. She read the page once, then she read it again. Her finger traced a line of text, and the air in the courtroom shifted. The humidity seemed to drop, replaced by a sudden, biting chill. The confident smile on the opposing lawyer's face faltered by a fraction of an inch. He sensed it too, the shift in gravity. Judge Sutter slowly closed the folder. She took off her glasses and folded them deliberately, placing them next to her nameplate. She did not look at Kendra. She did not look at the expensive lawyer. She did not look at the clapping parents. She looked straight at me. "Ms. Robinson," Judge Sutter said. Her voice was not loud, but it carried a weight that made the wood paneling seem to vibrate. I swallowed, my throat dry as sandpaper. "Yes, Your Honor." The judge leaned forward, her eyes narrowing, studying me. It was not a look of judgment, but of curiosity. It was the look of someone who realizes they have been watching a play where the actors are saying lines from two different scripts. "I have read the affidavits from your parents," the judge said. "I have read the statement from your sister claiming that this transfer of ownership was agreed upon 6 months ago to relieve you of the burden of home ownership." "Yes, Your Honor," I whispered. "And yet," Judge Sutter continued, her voice dropping an octave, becoming dangerous, "I am looking at the date on this so-called verbal agreement summary filed by the plaintiff." Kendra shifted in her seat. The rustle of her silk blouse was audible. "Ms. Robinson," the judge asked, and her eyes locked onto mine, ignoring the frantic energy suddenly radiating from the plaintiff's table. "Do you have any knowledge as to why this agreement surfaced for the very first time exactly 3 days after the City Council made the public announcement regarding the Westside Land buyout project?" The question hung in the air like smoke. I blinked. I felt a physical jolt in my chest, like a missed heartbeat. "I beg your pardon, Your Honor." "The buyout project," Judge Sutter repeated, her gaze shifting now, slicing sideways to land on Kendra. "The municipal expansion plan that authorizes the city to acquire residential properties on Juniper Ridge Road at 150% of market value for the new riverfront development." The silence that followed was absolute. It was violent. I stood there, my mouth slightly open. I had been living in that house, struggling to pay for repairs, fixing the roof with my own 2 hands, eating instant noodles to afford the property taxes. I knew nothing about a buyout. I knew nothing about a development plan. But as I looked across the aisle, I saw that I was the only one who was surprised. Kendra's face had gone the color of old ash. Her mouth was a tight, white line. The sorrowful, concerned sister act had evaporated, replaced by the raw, panic-stricken look of a gambler who realizes the dealer has checked the deck. Next to her, the lawyer was suddenly very busy organizing his papers, refusing to make eye contact with the bench, and behind them, the applause had died. My parents sat frozen. My father's face was red, his jaw working silently. My mother looked down at her hands, twisting the strap of her handbag. They knew. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. This was not about me being unable to handle the house. This was not about my mental health. This was not about family looking out for family. This was about money. They knew the house was about to become a goldmine. They knew the city was coming with a checkbook, and they had tried to bully me out of the deed before the news reached my mailbox so that Kendra Golden, perfect Kendra, could collect the payout that belonged to me. I stammered, my voice gaining a little strength, fueled by the sudden flare of heat in my stomach. "No, Your Honor, I did not know about the project." Judge Sutter nodded slowly. She picked up her glasses again but did not put them on. She tapped the arm of the glasses against the file. "I see," the judge said. "It seems curious to me that a concern for your mental well-being coincides so perfectly with a massive appreciation in real estate value. It seems almost miraculous." She turned her gaze fully onto Kendra. My sister shrank back. For the first time in her life, Kendra looked small. "Counselor," Judge Sutter said to Kendra's lawyer, her voice dripping with ice, "I suggest you take a moment to explain to your client the definition of perjury and the penalties for filing frivolous motions to defraud, because from where I am sitting, this does not look like a family dispute. It looks like a heist." The lawyer opened his mouth, but no sound came out. I looked at my parents. My mother finally looked up, and for a second, her eyes met mine. There was no love there. There was no apology. There was only fear. Fear that they had been caught. Fear that the narrative they had controlled for 3 decades was unraveling in a public court of law. I turned back to the judge. My hands were no longer fists. I placed them flat on the table. The wood felt cool and solid under my palms. They always decide who I am before I get a chance to speak, I said. I did not mean to say it aloud, but the words slipped out. Quiet and undeniable. Judge Sutter heard me. She looked back at me, and for the first time, there was a flicker of something human in her expression. Respect, maybe, or perhaps just an acknowledgement that she saw the game board clearly now. Well, Ms. Robinson, the judge said, opening the file again. It appears the court is now listening. Kendra let out a small, strangled sound. She knew, and I knew, that the house was just the beginning. The secret the judge had just exposed was not merely about property values or zoning laws. It was about greed. It was about the things people do when they think no one is watching, and the absolute terror they feel when the lights are suddenly turned on. The judge looked at the calendar on her desk. We are going to recess. I want full discovery on the origin of this document, and I want a detailed timeline of when the plaintiff became aware of the city's proposal. We reconvene in 48 hours. She banged the gavel. The sound cracked through the room like a gunshot. Finally, I whispered to myself, echoing my sister's opening line, but the meaning had changed completely. Kendra scrambled to her feet, whispering furiously to her lawyer. My parents remained seated, looking like statues in a museum of bad decisions. I did not move. I watched them panic. I watched the structure of their lies tremble. I had walked into this courtroom thinking I was fighting to keep a roof over my head. I realized now that I was fighting for something much more expensive. I was fighting for the truth of my own life, and thanks to a city project I had never heard of, I finally had a weapon. The house was mine, but the war had just begun. To understand why my sister thought she could look a judge in the eye and claim my home was hers, you have to understand the dinner table dynamics of the Robinson family. You have to understand that in the mythology of our household, Kendra was the sun, burning bright and demanding orbit, while I was just the gravity that kept everyone's feet on the floor. Growing up, I was never called smart or beautiful or talented. I was called responsible. It sounds like a compliment, but in my family, the word responsible was not an adjective. It was a job description. It meant that when Kendra wrecked her car 3 weeks after getting her license, I was the one who had to share my savings to help cover the deductible because she was just so upset. And surely I did not want to see her cry. It meant that at Thanksgiving, while Kendra regaled the aunts and uncles with embellished stories of her mediocre achievements, I was in the kitchen scraping turkey fat off the roasting pan. My parents, Marianne and Douglas, did not explicitly tell me I was less important. They were far too subtle for that. They did it with geometry, at the dinner table. Their bodies were always angled toward Kendra. When she spoke, forks lowered. When I spoke, they would glance at the clock or remind me that I needed to take the trash out before it got dark. Kendra learned early on that the world was a buffet, and she had a VIP pass. If there was one slice of pie left, it was hers. If there was a conflict over who got the front seat, she got it. If she broke something, it was an accident. If I broke something, it was carelessness. She absorbed this entitlement until it was not just a behavior but a fundamental part of her cellular structure. She believed she deserved things simply because she wanted them. I, on the other hand, learned the art of shrinking. I learned that silence was the only way to avoid friction. I became an expert at the apology. I apologized for taking up space. I apologized when my mother was stressed. I apologized when Kendra failed a math test because clearly, I should have helped her study more. I made myself small so they would have more room to be big. There was only one person who saw me. Aunt Lillian was my father's older sister, but she seemed to belong to a different species entirely. She did not dye her gray hair. She did not wear the pastel cardigans my mother favored. She wore flannel shirts and denim that had actual dirt on the knees. She lived in a town called Wexford Glen, about 40 minutes away, in a house that always smelled of sawdust and lemon oil. Lillian was the only person who looked me in the eye when she spoke to me. I started escaping to her house on weekends when I was 16. I would tell my parents I was going to the library or volunteering, and instead, I would drive to Wexford Glen. Lillian did not treat me like a niece to be coddled or a servant to be utilized. She treated me like an apprentice. She taught me that a woman who waits for someone else to fix the leak is a woman who is waiting to drown. We spent our Saturdays in her garage. She taught me how to sand down a table until the wood felt like silk. She taught me how to wire a lamp. She taught me the difference between a Phillips and a flathead, not just by showing me, but by making me do it until my hands were sore. One rainy afternoon, while we were drinking Earl Grey tea on her porch, she looked at me with her sharp, blue eyes and said something I never forgot. "Chloe," she said, "you have to own your life. If you do not hold the deed to your own existence, someone else is going to lease it out from under you." I did not fully understand what she meant at the time. I thought she was talking about careers or marriage. I did not realize she was giving me a warning. When Lillian died of a sudden aneurysm, the grief I felt was a heavy, silent thing. My parents performed their grief loudly, wearing black and sighing at the appropriate volumes, but they were more concerned with the logistics of the estate than the loss of the person. Kendra barely pretended to care. She had always called Lillian the odd one. Then came the reading of the will. We sat in a stiff beige office of a local attorney. Kendra was checking her phone under the table. My mother was already talking about how they would need to hire a cleaning crew to clear out Lillian's hoarding. The lawyer cleared his throat and read the clause that shifted the tectonic plates of our family. To my niece, Chloe Robinson, I leave my property located at 412 Juniper Ridge Road, along with all contents and personal effects. The room went silent. Kendra's head snapped up. My mother made a sound like she had been pinched. "Why, Chloe?" Kendra asked, her voice sharp. The lawyer shrugged. "The will is specific." My parents immediately turned on me. It was not a congratulations. It was an interrogation. Douglas looked at me with a furrowed brow. "Chloe, honey, that house is a disaster. It is old. It has bad plumbing. The roof is probably rotting. You cannot handle a burden like that," Marianne chimed in. Her voice pitched high with fake concern. "We should look into selling it immediately. The money could go into a trust. You do not know the first thing about property taxes or maintenance. It will bankrupt you." Kendra laughed, a short, dismissive sound. "Let her have it. It is a dump anyway. Who wants to live in Wexford Glen? It is 40 minutes from the city. It is basically the middle of nowhere." She leaned back, crossing her arms. She was not jealous, not yet, to her. The house was garbage. It was a dusty, creaking relic filled with old tools and unfinished projects. It was beneath her. But for the first time in my life, I did not apologize. I did not yield. I thought about the weekends in the garage. I thought about the smell of sawdust. I thought about the feeling of sanding wood until the roughness was gone. "I am keeping it," I said. My father stared at me. "You are making a mistake." "Maybe," I said, "but it is my mistake to make." That was the first time I owned something that required no one else's permission. I moved into the Craftsman house on Juniper Ridge Road 2 weeks later. It was drafty. The floors squeaked. The kitchen cabinets were painted a hideous shade of yellow. But when I locked the front door at night, the silence inside was not the oppressive silence of my childhood. It was the peaceful silence of possession. However, the seeds of the courtroom war were planted before I even unpacked my first box. It happened at the funeral reception, a catered affair my parents hosted at their house to show off their mourning. I was standing near the buffet, trying to avoid conversation, when Kendra walked up to me. She was holding a glass of white wine, looking bored. She looked at me, her eyes drifting over my shoulder as if looking for someone more interesting to talk to. "You know," she said casually, swirling her wine, "you might want to hold off on doing any major renovations on that shack." "Why?" I asked. She shrugged. "I heard some rumors. A friend of a friend who works in city planning said that whole area around the river is going to be rezoned or something. Might be worth something in 5 or 10 years. But honestly, I would just sell it now and buy a condo." I did not think much of it. Kendra always had rumors. She always acted like she had inside information to make herself feel important. I assumed she was just trying to make me feel insecure about the property, implying that I was sitting on a complicated investment I was too stupid to manage. I nodded and walked away to get a glass of water. I did not know then that she was not guessing. I did not know that she had not just heard a rumor from a friend. I did not know that she was already calculating. At the time, I just thought she was being Kendra dismissive, superior, and uninterested in anything that did not directly benefit her. I was wrong. She was interested. She was just waiting for the right number to appear on a spreadsheet before she made her move. She let me take the house because she thought it was worthless. But the moment she realized that the responsible sister had accidentally inherited a gold mine, the countdown began. I spent the next 2 years pouring my sweat and my salary into that house, thinking I was building a home. I had no idea I was simply fattening a calf for my sister to slaughter. My life became a bifurcated existence. By day, I was a claims adjuster for Northgate Meridian Claims, A mid-sized insurance firm where I sat in a gray cubicle and listened to people scream at me over the telephone about deductibles and coverage limits. My job was to say no. I spent 8 hours a day explaining to strangers that the water damage in their basement was not covered because it was classified as seepage rather than a sudden burst, or that their fender bender was technically their fault because of a failure to yield. It was a draining, thankless profession that left my ears ringing and my spirit gray by 5 in the afternoon. But by night, and on the weekends, I became a carpenter, a plumber, and a general contractor. The house on Juniper Ridge Road was not just a place I slept. It was a physical manifestation of my autonomy, and it required blood sacrifice. When I moved in, the place was barely habitable. The inspection report had been a 30-page horror story of deferred maintenance. The electrical wiring was from the 1950s. The roof had a slow leak that had rotted a section of the attic joists, and the plumbing groaned like a dying animal every time I flushed the toilet. My parents and Kendra had assumed I would hire people to fix it, run out of money, and then come crawling back to them for a loan, at which point they would graciously force me to sell. They underestimated my stubbornness. They also underestimated the power of the internet and the public library. I did not have the budget for contractors. I had a salary that barely covered the mortgage and the materials, so I traded sleep for sweat. I remember the first month vividly. I decided to tackle the bathroom because the linoleum was peeling up at the corners, revealing a layer of black mold underneath. I watched 4 hours of tutorial videos on my laptop, bought a respirator mask and a pry bar, and went to work. I spent 3 nights on my knees, scraping up 70 years of flooring glue that had calcified into something harder than stone. My hands blistered. My back seized up so badly I had to roll out of bed in the morning. There were mistakes. Stupid, amateur mistakes that cost me time and money I did not have. I remember trying to install a new vanity sink. I had measured the space 3 times, or so I thought. I bought a beautiful porcelain unit on clearance, hauled it up the front steps by myself, and maneuvered it into the bathroom, sweating and cursing. When I went to slide it into place, it did not fit. I had forgotten to account for the thickness of the baseboards. I sat on the bathroom floor and cried for 10 minutes. Then, I wiped my face, got up, went to the garage, found a coping saw, and spent the next 2 hours carefully cutting the trim to make space. Another time, I was patching the drywall in the hallway. I mixed the joint compound too thin, and it dripped down the wall like sad icing. I had to sand it all down and start over. I painted the living room a shade called Morning Dove, only to realize once it dried that it looked purple in the afternoon light. I had to buy 5 more gallons of primer and paint over it the very next weekend. But with every mistake, I learned that you always turn off the main water breaker before touching a faucet, even if you think the local valve is tight. I learned that you cannot cheat on sanding if you want the paint to stick. I learned that there is a specific, rhythmic satisfaction in driving a nail flush into a stud with 2 clean strikes, and I documented everything. It was not because I suspected a lawsuit. It was because I was proud. For the first time in my life, I was doing something real. I kept a binder. Every receipt from the hardware store was smoothed out and taped onto a sheet of paper. Every gallon of paint, every box of screws, every rental fee for the floor sander. I took photos on my phone to track the progress. Here is the rotted beam. Here is the new sister joist I installed. Here is the city inspector signing off on the electrical permit I had pulled myself. That binder grew thick. It was a diary of labor. During those 18 months, my family was a ghost. Kendra never visited, not once. She lived 20 minutes away, but she acted as if Wexford Glen was on a different continent. On the rare occasions we spoke, she would ask, "How is the money pit?" with a little laugh, expecting me to complain. I never did. I just said, "It is coming along," and changed the subject. My parents drove by once, on their way to a winery further upstate. They did not come in. My mother texted me from the driveway. "Looks like a lot of work. Do not kill yourself over a house that is falling down." They did not see a home. They saw a mistake that I was too stubborn to admit. To them, my silence was proof that I was drowning. But I was not drowning. I was building. Then, the neighborhood began to change. It started with small things. The potholes on Juniper Ridge Road, which had been there since the Clinton administration, were suddenly filled by city crews. The streetlights were upgraded to bright, clean LEDs. I received a flyer in the mailbox about a community meeting regarding the Riverline Renewal Initiative. I skimmed it over my morning coffee. It looked like typical municipal boredom. A plan to clean up the riverbank, add some walking trails, maybe a playground. I thought it was nice, I thought it would make my morning runs more pleasant. I did not attend the meeting because I was busy tiling the kitchen backsplash that night. A few weeks later, I noticed the cars. They were not the usual rusted sedans or pickup trucks of my neighbors. They were sleek. Black SUVs and luxury sedans with out-of-state plates. Men and women in sharp business suits started walking around the neighborhood, pointing at lots, taking notes on iPads. I was in the front yard, weeding the flower beds I had finally planted, when a man in a navy blue suit stopped at the edge of my lawn. He smiled a predatory, shark-like smile that did not reach his eyes. "Beautiful property," he said. "Great bones. You the owner?" "Yes," I said, wiping dirt on my jeans. "You looking to sell anytime soon?" he asked casually. "Market is heating up. Could get you a great cash offer. Close in 10 days. "No thank you," I said. "I just finished the kitchen." He chuckled, handed me a business card, and walked away. I looked at the card. It did not have a company logo, just a name and a phone number. I threw it in the trash, but a strange feeling settled in my gut, a low-level hum of anxiety. 2 days later, my phone rang. It was Kendra. "Hey, little sister," she said. Her voice was syrupy, dripping with an affection that set my teeth on edge. She had not called me little sister since she wanted to borrow my car in high school. "Hi, Kendra," I said, cradling the phone between my ear and shoulder as I washed dishes. "What is up?" "Oh, nothing much. Just thinking about you. Mom and Dad and I were talking over dinner last night." I froze. The sponge stopped moving on the plate. "Oh, yeah, we are just really worried about you. Chloe, we know how hard you have been working at that insurance job, and we know that Old House is just a massive drain on your resources. It is not fair, really." "It is not a drain," I said, keeping my voice steady. "I like working on it." Sure, she said dismissively. "But listen, Mom and Dad feel terrible that Aunt Lillian put all this on you. They think it is really unfair that you are shouldering this burden alone while I am out here free and clear. It creates an imbalance in the family. You know," I dried my hands on a towel, my heart starting to pound. "Imbalance. Right, so, we were thinking, it might be better if we brought the house back into the family trust. You know, put it under a shared LLC or something. I would come on as a co-owner. I could help with the management. Maybe hire some real contractors to finish the work, so you do not have to break your back anymore. We could split the equity. It is just the right thing to do." I stood in my kitchen, looking at the backsplash I had tiled with my own hands. I looked at the floor I had sanded. I looked at the walls I had painted. "Kendra," I said slowly, "Aunt Lillian left the house to me. Specifically, well, Lillian was old," Kendra said, her tone sharpening just a fraction. "She probably did not realize how much work it needed. She would not have wanted you to struggle like this. We are just trying to help you. Chloe, don't be difficult." "I am not being difficult," I said. "I am being the owner. The answer is no. I do not need help, and I do not need a co-owner." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. When Kendra spoke again, the syrup was gone. Her voice was flat and cold. "You are making a mistake," she said. "We are just trying to make sure everyone gets what is fair. You should really think about it before you make a decision you cannot walk back from." "I have thought about it," I said. "Goodbye, Kendra." I hung up. My hands were shaking. It was not out of fear, but out of a sudden, clarifying rage. They wanted the house. After 2 years of calling it a dump, after ignoring my existence, they suddenly wanted in. Why I sat down at my laptop to check my email, trying to distract myself. My inbox was full of the usual spam and work notifications, but there was one email that stood out. It was from a generic address, something like user124@protonmail.com. The subject line was just one word: urgent. I hovered the mouse over it. I almost deleted it, thinking it was a phishing scam, but something made me click. The body of the email was short. Ms. Robinson. Do not sign anything your sister or parents give you. Do not agree to any transfers. They are not interested in the house. They are interested in the Riverline renewal buyout. The city is authorizing eminent domain buyouts at 150% of value, plus relocation bonuses. Your property is in the Zone A tier. It is worth 3 times what you think it is. They know. Check the City Planning Commission meeting minutes from last Tuesday. I stared at the screen. The white light of the monitor seemed to burn into my retinas. Buyout, 150%. The puzzle pieces slammed together with a deafening click. The repairs to the road, the suits in the SUVs, The sudden interest from Kendra, the concern from my parents. They did not want to help me carry the burden. They wanted to steal the winning lottery ticket out of my pocket before I realized I was holding it. I leaned back in my chair, the leather creaking. I looked around the room I had built. I looked at the binder of receipts on the shelf. "Okay," I whispered to the empty room. "If that is how you want to play it." I did not delete the email. I printed it, then I printed it again, and then I went to the closet, pulled out my fireproof document box, and placed the paper inside, right on top of Aunt Lillian's will. Kendra had said, "We'll see." Yes, we certainly would. 3 days after I received the anonymous email, the knock on my front door came. It was not a neighbor borrowing sugar, and it was not a package delivery. It was a process server. He was a heavy-set man with a bored expression and a clipboard. Standing on the porch I had just repainted. He asked for my name, verified my identity with a quick glance at a photograph clipped to his paperwork, and shoved a thick manila envelope into my hands. "You have been served," he said, turning around and walking back to his idling car before I could even blink. I took the envelope into the kitchen. The paper felt heavy, dense with the weight of officialdom. I sat down at the table, my heart hammering a rhythm against my ribs that felt like a warning drum. I slit the top open with a knife and slid the contents out. The first page was a cover sheet, standard legal formatting, lines and numbers running down the left margin, but the text in the center was what stopped my breath. Superior Court of the State of Washington, Civil Division, Case number CV20240911, Kendra Hartman, Plaintiff v. Chloe Robinson, Defendant, that small, lowercase, v. It was such a tiny letter, usually innocuous, but sitting there between our names, it looked like a knife blade. It slashed the history of our childhood, the shared holidays, and the blood connection in half. It was no longer Chloe and Kendra. It was Kendra versus Chloe. I turned the page to the complaint for declaratory judgment and constructive trust. I forced myself to read it, my training as a claims adjuster kicking in. I detached my emotions. I became a reader of facts. The document was a masterpiece of fiction. Plaintiff alleges, the document read, that on or about January 15th, the defendant, Chloe Robinson, entered into a verbal contract with the plaintiff to share equal ownership of the property located at 412 Juniper Ridge Road. I scanned down the page. Defendant, citing overwhelming financial distress and mental instability following the death of the previous owner, Lillian Robinson, requested the plaintiff's assistance in managing the asset. Defendant verbally agreed to transfer the deed into a joint tenancy in exchange for administrative and financial oversight. I felt a cold laugh bubble up in my throat. Mental instability, financial distress. I had paid every bill early. I had a credit score of 780, but the document went further. It claimed that I had recently reneged on the agreement due to erratic behavior, and therefore, Kendra was asking the court to intervene. She was requesting an immediate injunction to prevent me from selling or encumbering the property and a court order to force the transfer of the deed. Then came the exhibits, Exhibit A and Exhibit B, affidavits, sworn statements signed under penalty of perjury. I looked at the signatures at the bottom of the pages. They were familiar. I had seen them on report cards, on permission slips, on birthday checks. Marianne Robinson, Douglas Robinson. My mother's affidavit stated, "My daughter Chloe has always struggled with significant decisions and has expressed to me multiple times that the house is too much for her to handle. She explicitly told us she wanted Kendra to take over the legal ownership to protect the family asset." My father's was shorter, more brutal. Chloe agreed to the transfer. She is now refusing due to an emotional episode. Kendra is the rightful steward of this property. I set the papers down. The kitchen was silent. The refrigerator hummed. I picked up my phone. My hands were steady, but they felt cold, as if the blood had drained out of them to protect my vital organs. I dialed my mother's number. She answered on the second ring. "Hello." "I got the papers," I said. There was a pause, a long, heavy silence where I could hear the faint sound of a television in the background. "Oh," she said. Her voice was not surprised. It was tired. "Chloe, please, do not make a scene." "A scene?" I asked, my voice low. "You signed a legal document saying I am mentally unstable. You lied to a court. Mom, you said I agreed to give Kendra my house. We are doing this for your own good," she said, her tone shifting into that familiar, suffocating pity. "You work so hard. You are always exhausted. We can see it. You are drowning in that place. Kendra just wants to help you carry the load. Why do you have to make everything so difficult? I am not drowning, I said. I am renovating, and I never agreed to give her anything. You are remembering it wrong, she said. You were so upset at the funeral. You said you didn't know what you were going to do. That was an agreement. Chloe, in spirit. In spirit is not a contract, I said. Then I heard a rustle, and my father's voice came on the line. He must have snatched the phone from her. Listen to me, he barked. Enough of this. Kendra has a husband. She has 2 kids. She has a future to secure. You are alone. Chloe, you are one person in a 4-bedroom house. It is selfish. The word hung there. Selfish. So because I am single, I do not deserve a home, I asked. Because you are single, you do not need a windfall. He corrected himself. Slipping up. He did not say home. He said windfall. It is about the money, I said. The buyout. I do not know what you are talking about, he lied, but his voice jumped a pitch. This is about family stability. Sign the settlement Kendra's lawyer sent. If you fight this, you will lose, and you will bankrupt yourself in legal fees. Be smart for once. Do what is best for the family. The line went dead. I lowered the phone. I stood there for a full minute, breathing in the scent of the fresh paint on the walls. Be smart for once. They thought smart meant obedient. They thought smart meant surrendering. I walked into the living room and grabbed my binder. The binder with the receipts. The binder with the permits. The binder with the timeline of every hour of sweat equity I had poured into this house. I was not going to cry. I was a claims adjuster. I dealt with liars and frauds for a living. I knew how to dismantle a false narrative. You do not do it with screaming matches. You do it with documentation. I went to my laptop and searched for civil litigation attorneys Wexford Glen. I skipped the ones with the flashy billboards. I looked for the ones with 3-star reviews because they were too aggressive or too distinct regarding details. I found a name, Caleb Rains. His website looked like it had been built in 2005, but his bio said he specialized in property disputes and fraud. I called his office. A machine answered. I left a message. My name is Chloe Robinson. My sister is suing me for a house I own, claiming a verbal contract that never happened. My parents are backing her up. I have receipts, I have timestamps, and I have a very strong suspicion this is about eminent domain fraud. He called me back 10 minutes later. His office was located above a dry cleaner in a strip mall on the edge of town. It smelled faintly of steam and starch. Caleb Rains was a man in his late 40s with hair that looked like he had been running his hands through it for a decade. He wore a rumpled button-down shirt with the sleeves rolled up to his elbows, and his desk was a geological formation of paper stacks. He did not offer me coffee. He pointed to a chair, took the envelope from me, and started reading. I watched him. He read fast. His eyes darted back and forth, scanning the legal boilerplate. Occasionally, he would snort or shake his head. After 10 minutes, he tossed the complaint onto his desk. Promissory estoppel, he said, leaning back in his creaking chair. It is the Hail Mary of contract law. They use it when they do not have a signature. They are claiming they relied on your promise to their detriment. I never promised anything, I said. I know, Caleb said. He looked at me, his eyes sharp and intelligent behind wire-rimmed glasses. If you had promised it, they would have made you sign something back then. The fact that they are filing this now means they are desperate. He tapped the affidavits. These are the problem, he said. Parents are powerful witnesses. Juries love parents. If mom and dad say you are crazy and you promise the house to the responsible sister, a judge might buy it. It is 2 against 1. I have proof, I said, pulling out my binder. I have 18 months of receipts. I have permits in my name. If I was just holding the house for Kendra, why did I pay for the new roof? Why did I pay the property taxes? Caleb took the binder. He flipped through it, his eyebrows raising. Nice, he muttered. Very nice. This establishes intent of ownership. This kills the unjust enrichment claim. You weren't squatting. You were investing. He closed the binder and looked at me. But you know, this is not a property dispute, right? He asked. They are not suing you because they want the house. They want the deed. There is a difference. I know, I said. Caleb leaned forward, resting his elbows on the papers. I did a little digging before you came in. The address, 412 Juniper Ridge. He pulled a large map out from under a pile of files and spread it over the desk. It was a zoning map of Wexford Glen, but it was marked up with red lines. This is the Riverline Renewal Project, he said, tapping a thick red zone along the riverbank. City Council voted on the budget appropriation last week in a closed session. Public announcement is technically next month, but the whispers are out. He pointed to a small square within the red zone. That is your house, he said. Zone A, priority acquisition. The city isn't just buying these houses. They are authorized to pay a premium to avoid holdouts. 150% of appraised value, plus a relocation stipend of $50,000. And since the market value has spiked because of the new tech corridor nearby, we are talking about a payout of nearly $750,000. I stared at the map. $750,000. Kendra has a gambling debt, I said. It was a guess, but it felt right. Or maybe just credit card debt. Or a mortgage she can't pay. Or she is just greedy, Caleb said. Doesn't matter. The point is, if she gets her name on that deed before the city cuts the check, she gets half. Or if she wins this suit and proves you are incompetent, she gets it all as your trustee. He looked at me. They are trying to strip you. Chloe, this is a hostile takeover. They are banking on you being too emotional to fight. They think you will see your parents on the witness list and fold. I thought about my father's voice on the phone. You are one person. I am not folding, I said. Caleb smiled. It was a grim, wolfish smile. Good, because I hate bullies. And I really hate forgery. Forgery? I asked. We will get to that, he said. First, we file a motion to dismiss. It won't work, but it buys us time. Then, we enter discovery. That is where the fun begins. We are going to ask for everything. Kendra's emails, her texts, her bank records. We are going to ask your parents for the metadata on their affidavits. We are going to find out exactly when this verbal agreement was supposedly made, and we are going to cross-reference it with every single interaction you have ever had. He pulled a fresh legal pad toward him and uncapped a pen. One question, he said. Did you know about the buyout before today? I hesitated. I thought about the anonymous email in my fireproof box. I had a suspicion, I said carefully. I received a warning. Good, Caleb said. Keep that warning safe. But for now, we play dumb on the inside knowledge. Let them think you are just a stubborn woman clinging to her sentimental house. Let them get arrogant. When they think they are fighting a sentimental battle, they get sloppy with the facts. He wrote Robinson Defense at the top of the pad. They want a war, Caleb said. Let's give them a war. But we don't fight with feelings. We fight with data. You are an adjuster. Adjust the claim. I looked at the map again, at the red line swallowing my home. They said I make things difficult, I said, standing up and smoothing my skirt. I want to show them exactly how difficult I can be. Caleb extended his hand. Welcome to the team, Ms. Robinson. I shook it. His grip was firm. For the first time since the process server knocked on my door, my heart rate slowed down. I walked out of his office and into the cool evening air. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the parking lot. I got into my car and looked at the thick envelope on the passenger seat. It was no longer a threat. It was evidence. And I was going to dissect it, line by line, until I found the lie that would bury them. The legal process is not a sprint. It is a slow, grinding excavation of the past, designed to wear you down until you suffocate under the weight of paper, while my sister, Kendra, likely expected me to fold under the pressure of the initial filing. She had forgotten that my entire professional life was built on patience. I spent my days analyzing insurance claims, looking for the one discrepancy in 1,000 pages of medical records. I knew how to dig. Caleb Raines started the offensive with a document that felt like a declaration of war. It was a request for production. A formal demand for every scrap of digital and physical evidence Kendra and my parents possessed regarding the house. We asked for the original metadata of the so-called verbal agreement summary. We asked for text message logs from the last 3 years. We asked for GPS data and bank statements. Caleb told me that 90% of liars forget that their phones are constantly creating a diary of their deceit. While Caleb handled the digital front, I turned my attention to the physical history of the house. I had lived in the Craftsman bungalow for 2 years, but there were still corners of the attic I had never fully explored. Aunt Lillian had been a woman of practical habits, but she was also secretive. She kept her life in boxes, labeled with masking tape and Sharpie. It was a Tuesday night, raining hard enough that the sound on the roof drowned out the thoughts in my head. I was in the guest room closet, which I was using for storage, shifting a stack of old magazines Lillian had kept from the 1990s. Beneath them was a heavy metal lockbox. I had found the key months ago in a kitchen drawer, but had never bothered to open it. Assuming it was just old tax returns or warranties for appliances long since broken, I sat on the floor and turned the key. The mechanism clicked with a satisfying weight. Inside, there were no jewels or cash. There was just a stack of papers and a single, thick white envelope. On the front of the envelope, in Lillian's distinct, spiky handwriting, were the words, "For Chloe if they ever take you to court." My breath hitched. I stared at the ink. Lillian had died of an aneurysm. It was sudden. Yet, she had written this. She had known. She had looked at her brother, my father, and her niece, my sister, and she had calculated the trajectory of their greed. She knew that the moment she was gone, the sharks would circle. I opened the envelope. Inside, there was no letter of sentiment. There was no, "I love you." Lillian was not that kind of woman. Instead, there was a sheet of yellow legal paper with a list of alphanumeric codes and a single sentence underlined 3 times. Check the option notice filed with the City Planning Commission. Reference code P729. Below that, she had written, "They have been watching the river line for 10 years. Do not let them steal the view." I did not sleep that night. The next morning, I called in sick to Northgate Meridian Claims. It was the first time I had missed a day of work in 4 years. I drove to the Wexford Glen City Hall, a brutalist concrete building that smelled of floor wax and stale coffee. I went to the records department in the basement. The clerk was a man with thick glasses and a sweater vest, who looked like he had not seen the sun since the previous administration. I gave him the reference code Lillian had left me, P729. "That is an older file," he said, tapping on his keyboard. "Archived in the physical stacks, part of the preliminary zoning study for the River District. You have a reason for accessing this." "I am the property owner of one of the parcels listed," I said, showing him my driver's license and a copy of my deed. He nodded and disappeared into the back. 20 minutes later, he returned with a folder that looked like it had been handled frequently. "You can look, but you cannot take photos," he said. "Copies are 25 cents a page." I opened the file. It was a study on the Riverline Renewal Project, dating back 5 years. It detailed the soil stability, the floodplains, and the projected economic impact of turning the old industrial bank into a luxury park and commercial district. I flipped through the pages until I found the section labeled Property Acquisition Options. This was the option notice Lillian had meant. It was a log of properties the city had identified as essential for the project. My address, 412 Juniper Ridge Road, was at the top of the list. But that was not the shock. The shock was a correspondence log attached to the back of the file. The city kept a record of all inquiries made regarding specific parcels to ensure transparency. I ran my finger down the list of dates. There was an entry from 6 months ago, 2 weeks before Aunt Lillian died. Inquiry regarding valuation and transfer timeline for 412 Juniper Ridge. Inquirer Douglas Robinson. Acting on behalf of owner. Contact email Drobinson Prestige Logistics Group, com. I stared at the line until the letters blurred. My father. He had used his work email Prestige Logistics Group to contact the city about my house before I even owned it. He had presented himself as acting on behalf of the owner. Lillian was still alive then. Had she known I looked at the notes the city clerk had typed next to the entry, Mr. Robinson inquired about the eminent domain premium percentages for Zone A. Advised that information is confidential until project ratification. He knew. He had known for 6 months. He knew that the house was not just a dusty craftsman bungalow. He knew it was a winning lottery ticket. And when Lillian left it to me, he did not see a daughter inheriting a home. He saw financial assets slipping out of his control. The lawsuit. The sudden concern for my mental health. The claim that I was overwhelmed, it was all a smokescreen. They were trying to get my name off the deed before the city announced the payout, so they could collect the check. I paid the 25 cents for the copy. I walked out of City Hall into the bright, blinding sunlight of noon, feeling sick to my stomach. It was one thing to suspect your family is greedy. It is another thing entirely to hold the proof in your hand that they have been plotting to liquidate your life for profit before the body of your aunt was even cold. I drove straight to Caleb's office. I threw the copy of the log on his desk. "They knew," I said. 6 months ago?" Caleb picked up the paper. He read it, then let out a low whistle. "Acting on behalf of owner," he read. "Did Lillian authorize this?" "No," I said. "She left me a note warning me. She knew he was sniffing around." Caleb leaned back, a dark satisfaction spreading across his face. "This is it, Chloe. This proves the motive. It proves bad faith. He is inquiring about premium percentages. He was literally counting the money." He looked at me seriously. But you have to listen to me very carefully. You cannot let them know that you have this. Not yet. Why not? I asked. I want to throw it in their faces. Because right now, they think you are just stubborn, Caleb said. They think you are fighting for sentimental reasons. If they know you found the city files, they will destroy other evidence. They will scrub their emails. We need to catch them in a lie under oath. We need them to commit to the narrative that they have no idea about the money. So what do? I asked. You play the victim, Caleb said. You play the tired, overwhelmed woman they claim you are. Make them think you are close to breaking. Make them confident. I went home. I sat in my kitchen, the same kitchen I had tiled with my own hands, and I looked at the phone. I needed to set a trap. I needed to confirm that Kendra was in on it, too. My father had made the inquiry, but Kendra was the plaintiff. I needed to know if she was a pawn or a co-conspirator. I waited until 7 in the evening. I poured a glass of wine, not to drink, but to set the mood for myself. I needed to sound weak. I typed a text message to Kendra. I am so tired of this. Kendra, the lawyer fees are already piling up. I don't know if I can keep fighting you and Mom and Dad. Maybe I should just let it go. I hit send. I watched the screen. My heart was thumping against my ribs like a trapped bird. 1 minute passed, then 2. The 3 little dots appeared. They danced for a long time, then disappeared. She was typing, then deleting. She was calculating. Then, the response came. I am glad you are finally seeing sense. Chloe, we just want what is best for you. If you sign the agreement this week, we can stop the court case immediately. I typed back, keeping it vague. I just want to be done with it, but I'm worried about the market. I don't want to sell at a loss. This was the bait. If she just wanted the house for the family, she would say, we aren't selling. The dots appeared instantly this time. Don't worry about the market. I have been looking into it. We can probably get a good price if we hold for a few months. When do you think the city would finalize the transfer? I froze. When do you think the city would finalize the transfer? I had not mentioned the city. I had not mentioned a transfer. I had only mentioned selling. She slipped. In her excitement. In her greed to close the deal and get her hands on the asset. She assumed I knew what she knew. She assumed we were talking about the buyout. I stared at the screen. I did not reply. I took a screenshot. Then another. Then I emailed the image to myself and to Caleb. Got you, I whispered. She was not just a concerned sister. She was counting the days until the payout. I looked around my living room. For months, I had felt like an intruder in my own life, fighting to justify my existence. But in that moment, the dynamic shifted. I was no longer the defendant. I was the one holding the keys. They thought the house was the prize, a pile of wood and brick to be cashed in. But they were wrong. The house was just the battlefield. The real treasure was the compensation check the city was writing, a check that was destined for the deed holder, and the deed holder was me. I put my phone down and walked to the window. I looked out at the street, at the dark river flowing beyond the tree line. You want the house, I said to the darkness. Come and take it. I went back to the closet and took out the binder, the one with the receipts, the permits, and the photos of my sweat and blood. I placed the screenshot of Kendra's text and the copy of my father's city inquiry at the very front. The slow burn was over. It was time to light the fire. The morning of the hearing. The sky outside the courthouse was a bruised shade of purple, heavy with a storm that refused to break. Inside courtroom 4B, the air was even heavier. I sat at the defense table, my hands folded on top of the binder that contained my entire life's work. Across the aisle, my family had arranged themselves into a tableau that looked like it had been curated by a public relations firm. Kendra sat in the middle, flanked by our parents, Marianne and Douglas. They were a wall of united, respectable grief. Kendra had dressed for the part of the burdened savior. She wore a soft, oatmeal-colored sweater and a modest skirt, her hair pulled back into a loose, unthreatening ponytail. She wore no jewelry except for a small silver cross I knew she had bought specifically for this occasion. She looked reasonable. She looked kind. She looked like a woman who was only in court because she had exhausted every other option to save her drowning sister. My parents sat with their backs straight, staring resolutely at the judge's bench. They did not look at me, not once. It was a specific kind of blindness, the ability to erase the person sitting 10 feet away because acknowledging her would mean acknowledging what they were doing to her. Judge Sutter entered the room, her black robe sweeping around her like a thundercloud. We all rose. The bailiff called the court to order, and the sound of everyone sitting down simultaneously was a dull thud that echoed in the high-ceilinged room. Kendra's lawyer, Mr. Sterling, stood up first. He was a man who knew how to use silence as a weapon. He took a long moment to arrange his cufflinks before he began. "Your Honor," he started, his voice a low, sympathetic rumble. "This case is not about malice. It is not about greed. It is about a family trying to intervene before a tragedy occurs." He walked toward the center of the room, gesturing vaguely in my direction without actually looking at me. "The defendant, Chloe Robinson, is a woman who has endured a significant amount of trauma in the last 2 years. The loss of her aunt, the isolation of living alone in a dilapidated property, the crushing weight of financial responsibility, it has taken a toll. We are here today because Ms. Robinson is no longer capable of making rational decisions regarding the asset in question." I sat perfectly still, under the table. My thumb traced the sharp edge of my binder. Trauma, isolation. They were taking my independence the weekends I spent learning to wire a junction box, the nights I spent painting until my shoulders burned and they were repainting it as a mental breakdown. "We have submitted affidavits from the parents," Sterling continued, attesting to the defendant's erratic behavior, her mood swings, her admission that the house was destroying her, but more importantly, "Your Honor, we are here to enforce an agreement that was made to alleviate that pressure." He walked back to his table and picked up a document. It was enclosed in a plastic sleeve. "This," he said, holding it up like a holy relic, "is a memorandum of shared ownership, signed by both Kendra Hartman and Chloe Robinson on January 15th of this year." My breath caught in my throat. Just for a second, I knew they were going to lie. I did not know they were going to manufacture a physical object. "The terms were simple," Sterling explained, handing the document to the bailiff to pass to the judge. Kendra Hartman would assume 50% legal ownership of the property. In exchange, she would take over the management of the renovation, the hiring of contractors, and the financial planning. It was a mercy, Your Honor. Chloe Robinson agreed to it. She signed it. And then, in a fit of paranoia, she refused to finalize the deed transfer. Judge Sutter took the document. She put on her glasses and leaned over it. The room was so quiet, I could hear the hum of the fluorescent lights. "Counsel," Judge Sutter said, not looking up, "the defendant claims this meeting never happened." "With all due respect," Sterling said, smiling sadly. "The defendant also claims she can reshingle a roof by herself. Her perception of reality is flexible. We have her signature. We have 2 witnesses, her parents, who were present when it was signed." At the mention of their role, my parents nodded. It was a synchronized movement, practiced and grave. My mother dabbed at dry eyes with a tissue. My father cleared his throat. A sound of reluctant duty. They were doing it. They were actually going through with it. They were willing to perjure themselves, to look a judge in the eye and swear that a lie was the truth, all for a cut of the buyout money. I felt a wave of nausea, hot and acidic, but I swallowed it down. Caleb, my attorney, touched my elbow lightly. It was a signal. "Wait, Ms. Robinson," Sterling said, finally turning to me. "You look surprised. Is it because you truly don't remember signing this, or is it because you regret giving up control?" I said nothing. I looked at him with a flat, unreadable expression. I had practiced this face in the mirror for 2 nights. It was the face of someone who was bored, not afraid. Sterling turned back to the judge. "We are simply asking the court to enforce the contract. Let Kendra Hartman step in. Let her save the asset, and by extension, save her sister." Kendra stood up then. It was a breach of protocol, but she did it with such timid grace that no one stopped her. "Your Honor," she said, her voice trembling just the right amount. "I don't want to hurt Chloe. I love her. She is so fragile right now. You should see the house. It is a mess. She has half-finished projects everywhere. She is living in a construction zone. I just want to help her finish it so she can rest." Fragile. The word hung in the air like a curse. I thought about the 300 pounds of drywall I had hauled up the stairs last month. I thought about the time I cut my hand on a rusted nail and wrapped it in duct tape so I could finish framing a window before the rain started. I was made of calluses and scar tissue. I was the furthest thing from fragile, but I let her speak. I let her pile the lies higher and higher, constructing a tower that was destined to fall. Judge Sutter was reading the document. She read it slowly, flipping the page, then flipping back, her brow furrowed. "Mr. Sterling," the judge said. Her voice cut through Kendra's performance like a razor. "Yes, Your Honor. This document," Judge Sutter said, tapping the paper with a manicured fingernail. It outlines the transfer of equity in great detail. It specifies that Kendra Hartman receives 50% of the title. It specifies that she has executive decision-making power over the sale of the property. Yes, Your Honor. Standard protection for a co-owner. Standard. Judge Sutter looked over her glasses. I am looking for the consideration clauses. I am looking for the financial obligations. Sterling blinked. I'm sorry. If Ms. Hartman is taking 50% of the house, the judge said, her voice dropping into a dry, logical monotone. Where is the clause stating she is responsible for 50% of the mortgage? Where is the clause regarding the property taxes? Where is the clause regarding the cost of materials for these renovations she intends to manage? The silence that followed was different from the silence before. It was the silence of a script going off the rails. Sterling shifted his weight. Well, Your Honor, as this is a family agreement, those details were implied. The sisters intended to work that out amicably as they went along. Implied, Judge Sutter repeated. She looked at Kendra. You wanted the authority to sell the house, Ms. Hartman, but you didn't feel it necessary to put in writing that you would help pay for it. Kendra's concerned sister mask slipped for a fraction of a second. We are family, she said, her voice sharpening. We trust each other. We didn't think we needed to be so transactional. You trusted each other enough to leave out the bills, Judge Sutter observed. But you didn't trust her enough to leave out the part where you get half the equity. That is not what I meant, Kendra stammered. It is a very specific document, Ms. Hartman. The judge continued. It is legally precise about what you get, and remarkably vague about what you give. In my experience, family trust usually works the other way around. My father leaned forward, sensing the shift. He looked like he wanted to interrupt, to use his blustering head of the household voice to correct the judge, but my mother put a hand on his arm, restraining him. Sterling tried to recover. Your Honor, the plaintiff has offered to cover costs verbally. The document was merely to formalize the ownership structure so she could secure loans for the repairs. Loans? The judge said. She wrote something down on her notepad. So the intent was to leverage the property immediately. To improve it, Sterling corrected quickly. Judge Sutter sat back. She looked at me. For the first time all morning, someone looked at me as a participant, not a prop. Ms. Robinson, she said, you have been very quiet. Caleb stood up. Your Honor, my client has been quiet because she has been waiting for the plaintiff to finish characterizing her as incompetent. I see, the judge said. And does the defendant have anything to say regarding this document? The signature appears to be yours. Ms. Robinson. The bailiff brought the document to our table. I looked at it. It was a good forgery. They had lifted my signature from somewhere else, probably an old birthday card, or a check I had written to my parents years ago and scanned it onto the page, but the ink was too flat. It lacked the indentation of a pen. I looked up. Kendra was staring at me. Her eyes were hard, boring into mine. She mouthed something, so slightly that only I could see it. Don't be stupid. Then, under the pretense of adjusting her skirt, she leaned toward the aisle, just a few inches closer to where I sat. Her whisper was a hiss, audible only to me and perhaps the court reporter. You are going to lose, she whispered. You should have let me handle this from the start. You are just going to ruin it for everyone. Ruin it, ruin the payout, ruin the heist. I felt a sudden clarity wash over me. It was cold and bright. They were not scared of me. They were annoyed by me. They viewed me as an obstacle to their payday, a speed bump on the road to the bank. They truly believed that their combined weight, the parents, the older sister, the expensive lawyer would crush me simply because I was alone. But I wasn't alone. I had the truth. And in a court of law, the truth is a battalion. I stood up. My legs felt solid. I did not look at my parents. I did not look at the lawyer. I looked straight at Judge Sutter. Your Honor, I said. My voice was not loud, but it was steady. It did not shake. It filled the room. I can explain everything you are seeing here. I can explain why the financial clauses are missing. I can explain why this document was created. Kendra stiffened. Sterling took a half step forward as if to object, but the judge held up a hand. Go on. Ms. Robinson, the judge said. But before I do, I continued, reaching down and opening my binder, the metal ring snapping open with a loud click that sounded like a gunshot in the quiet room. I would like the court to see what they are actually doing first, because this is not a case about a house, and it is certainly not a case about family. I pulled out the first document. It was not the forgery analysis. It was not the text messages, it was the timeline. Ms. Hartman claims she wants to save me from a burden, I said, holding the paper up. But people don't fight this hard to inherit a liability. They fight this hard to inherit a fortune. Kendra's face went pale. She knew I had something. She didn't know what, but she knew the script had just been set on fire. Proceed, Judge Sutter said, leaning forward, her eyes locking onto mine. Thank you, Your Honor, I said. I would like to direct the court's attention to the timing of this lawsuit. I walked toward the bench, passing Kendra. I didn't whisper back. I didn't need to. The look on my face said it all. Finally, your secrets are mine. Caleb Raines did not shout. He did not pace the floor like a lawyer in a television drama, waving his arms to distract the jury. In fact, he barely moved at all. He stood at our table, adjusting his glasses with a precision that was far more terrifying than any theatrical display of anger. He looked like a surgeon who had just picked up a scalpel and was deciding exactly where to make the first incision. Your Honor, Caleb said, his voice level and dry, the plaintiff has presented a document, Exhibit A, which they claim is a binding contract signed on January 15th of this year. They claim this document proves my client, Ms. Robinson, willingly surrendered half her equity. He paused, letting the words hang in the air. We would like to present a rebuttal to the authenticity of this document, and we would like to do so not with testimony, but with digital forensics. Mr. Sterling, Kendra's lawyer, shifted in his seat. He looked at the document in front of him, then back at Caleb. A flicker of doubt crossed his face. He was an expensive lawyer, but even expensive lawyers can be blindsided when their clients lie to them. Caleb picked up a remote control and pointed it at the monitor mounted on the wall to the left of the judge's bench. Defense Exhibit 1, Caleb said. The screen flickered to life. It displayed a screenshot of a file properties window, the kind of boring technical data most people ignore. Mr. Sterling was kind enough to email us the digital copy of this agreement as part of the discovery process yesterday, Caleb said. This is the metadata for that file. As the court is aware, metadata is the digital fingerprint of a document. It tells us when a file was created, when it was modified, and by whom. He pressed a button. A red laser pointer dot appeared on the screen, circling a date. The document is dated January 15th, Caleb said. But the creation date of this file, the very moment this digital paper came into existence, was last Tuesday, specifically at 4:52 in the afternoon. Kendra froze. Her posture, which had been so perfectly erect and righteous, suddenly became rigid. Now, Caleb continued, it is possible, of course, that the plaintiff drafted a new copy from an old hard drive. However, let us look at the modification history. The total editing time for this document was 12 minutes. It was created, typed, saved, and exported to PDF in less time than it takes to drink a cup of coffee. That suggests a copy-paste job, not a negotiated legal agreement. Objection, Sterling said, half rising. This is speculation. The electronic file is merely a copy of the physical original. A physical original, Judge Sutter said, her eyes narrowing behind her glasses. That looks remarkably pristine for being 6 months old. Overruled. Continue. Mr. Raines. Caleb nodded. Thank you, Your Honor. Let us move to the physical document itself. He clicked the remote again. The screen changed. This time, it showed a blown-up image of the top of the agreement, focusing on the decorative border and the template style used for the header. Defense Exhibit 2, Caleb said. This document uses a specific legal template from a software package called Legal Ease Pro. It is a very popular subscription service for drafting simple contracts. I use it myself. He clicked the remote. A letter from the software company appeared on the screen. We contacted the vendor, Caleb said. This specific template, the modern family asset transfer layout, distinguished by this double-line border and the specific font pairing, was released in an update on March 1st of this year. The room went deadly silent. The plaintiff claims they signed this document in January, Caleb said, his voice dropping an octave. It is physically impossible to sign a document on a template that did not exist until 2 months later. I looked at my parents. My father's face had drained of color. He was staring at the screen as if it were a ghost. My mother was gripping her handbag so tightly her knuckles were white. She looked confused, her eyes darting between Kendra and the screen. She had signed where Kendra told her to sign. She had followed the plan. She had not realized the plan was flawed. And finally, Caleb said, the signature. He clicked the remote a third time. 2 images appeared side by side, On the left was my signature from the agreement. On the right were 5 signatures taken from checks I had written for my property taxes and utility bills over the last year. We had a handwriting analyst review the document, Caleb said. The report is in your file, Your Honor. The analyst concluded that the signature on the agreement lacks the natural fluidity of pen pressure. Under high magnification, you can see distinct pixelation artifacts around the curves of the letters C and R. It indicates that this is not ink on paper. It is a high-resolution image of a signature that was lifted from another source and digitally placed onto the page. Ridiculous. The word exploded from the plaintiff's table. Kendra stood up. Her face flushed a blotchy red. The concerned sister mask was gone. In its place was the face of a woman who was watching her future fortune evaporate. "This is ridiculous," she shouted, pointing a shaking finger at me. She signed it. She sat right there at the kitchen table and signed it. She is lying. "Sit down, Ms. Hartman." Judge Sutter's voice cracked like a whip. "One more outburst and I will hold you in contempt. Mr. Sterling, control your client." Sterling grabbed Kendra's arm and practically dragged her back into her chair. He was whispering furiously to her, his face pale. He knew. He realized right then that he had walked into a minefield. Caleb waited for the noise to settle. He looked unfazed. He looked like he was just getting started. "We have one final point regarding the document, Your Honor," Caleb said. "And this one is perhaps the most concerning." He walked over to the bailiff and handed him a magnifying glass. "If the court would please examine the notary stamp on the bottom of the last page." Judge Sutter picked up the original document and the magnifying glass. "The notary seal belongs to a Mr. Arthur Higgins," Caleb said. "A notary public registered in the neighboring county. However, if you look at the commission expiration date stamped in the ink..." Judge Sutter squinted. She adjusted the glass. Then she looked up, and her expression was terrifying. "The commission expires on December 31st of last year," the judge read. "Exactly," Caleb said. "The document is dated January 15th of this year. At the time this document was allegedly signed and notarized, Mr. Higgins' commission had been expired for 2 weeks. A valid notary would never use an expired stamp. It renders the notarization void. Furthermore, we checked the public registry. Mr. Higgins did renew his commission, but his new stamp, the one he would have legally been required to use in January, has a different identification number." Caleb turned to look at Kendra. "This stamp was either stolen, or it was used by someone who had an old stamp lying around and didn't check the date before they forged a federal document." My mother let out a small, strangled sob. "Douglas," she whispered, loud enough for me to hear. "You said it was legal. You said we were just fixing a mistake." My father did not answer her. He was staring at the table. His jaw clenched so hard, a muscle was jumping in his cheek. He was a man who prided himself on control, on being the patriarch who knew best. Now, he was being exposed as a clumsy fraud. "Your Honor," Sterling said, standing up slowly. He looked defeated. "I need to request a recess to confer with my client regarding the provenance of this document. I am not granting a recess yet. Mr. Sterling," Judge Sutter said. Her voice was cold enough to freeze water, "because I want to hear the rest of what the defense has to say. Mr. Raines." "Thank you," Caleb said. "We have established that the document is a fabrication. But that begs the question, why go to such lengths? Why risk felony forgery charges to take half a house that the plaintiff claims is a burden?" He walked back to our table and plugged an audio cable into his laptop. "The plaintiff claims she only wants to help her sister," Caleb said. "She claims she has no interest in financial gain. She claims she knew nothing about the value of the land." He looked at me. I nodded. "This is a voicemail," Caleb said. "Left by Kendra Hartman on my client's phone 3 days ago, shortly after my client stopped responding to her text messages." He pressed the spacebar. The sound of my sister's voice filled the courtroom. It was not the soft, modulating voice she used in public. It was sharp, shrill, and dripping with venom. "Pick up the phone. Chloe, I know you are there. Stop playing games. Mom and Dad are losing their minds. Just sign the damn paper. We need to get this filed before the city money hits, or we are all going to lose out. Do you hear me? Don't play dumb. You can't handle that kind of cash anyway. Sign it before you ruin everything." The recording ended. The silence that followed was absolute. It was the silence of a vacuum. Kendra sat frozen. Her face had gone past red and turned a sickly shade of gray. She looked like she had been slapped. The audio recording had stripped her naked in front of the court. There was no concern. There was no burden. There was only city money and cash. My mother put her face in her hands. My father closed his eyes. They had not known about the voicemail. They knew about the plan. Yes, they knew about the goal, but they had not known that their daughter, their golden child, had been so reckless, so arrogant, as to scream her motive into a digital recorder. Judge Sutter slowly took off her glasses. She placed them on her desk. She folded her hands. She did not look at the lawyers. She looked directly at Kendra. Ms. Hartman, the judge said. Kendra did not move. Ms. Hartman, look at me. Kendra raised her head. Her eyes were wide, filled with the panic of a trapped animal. The phrase, city money, the judge said, enunciating each syllable clearly. Would you care to explain to this court exactly what city money you were referring to? Kendra opened her mouth, but no sound came out. She looked at her lawyer, but Sterling was busy studying the grain of the wood on the table. He was distancing himself. He was already calculating how to withdraw from the case without getting disbarred. Kendra croaked. I just meant property values. Generally, Judge Sutter repeated. You warned your sister to sign before the city money hits. That implies a specific event, a specific timeline, a specific payout. The judge leaned forward. I asked you at the beginning of this hearing if you knew about the Riverline Renewal Project. You said no. You said you had no knowledge of any buyouts. I heard rumors, Kendra stammered, tears starting to spill over. But they were not the pretty, sympathetic tears she had planned. They were ugly, messy tears of guilt. Just rumors. Rumors don't have deadlines, Judge Sutter said. And rumors don't make people forge legal documents using expired notary stamps. The judge turned to my father. And you, Mr. Robinson? You clapped when your daughter claimed the house was hers. Did you know about this city money? My father looked up. He looked old. The arrogance was gone. I thought it would be best for the family to keep the assets together. That is not what I asked, the judge snapped. She looked at the entire group of them, the sister, the mother, the father, the family that had supposed to be my safety net. It appears, Judge Sutter said, that this court has been used as an instrument of fraud, and I do not take kindly to being used. She turned to Caleb. Mr. Raines, does the defense have any further evidence regarding the plaintiff's knowledge of the city project? Caleb smiled. It was a small, tight smile. As a matter of fact, Your Honor, he said, picking up the piece of paper I had retrieved from the city archives, the one with my father's email address on it. We do. I watched them. I watched the realization hit them that it wasn't just over. It was catastrophically over. They had come for my house. Now, they were about to lose their reputations, and perhaps their freedom. Proceed, Judge Sutter said. The air in the courtroom had shifted from the stale, bureaucratic atmosphere of a civil dispute to the sharp, electric tension of a criminal investigation. My sister, Kendra, was still shrinking into her chair following the exposure of her voicemail, her face a mask of ruined arrogance. My father was staring at his hands, and my mother was weeping silently, a performance that no longer garnered any sympathy from the bench. But Caleb Raines was not done. He checked his watch, then looked toward the double doors at the back of the room. Your Honor, the defense calls Mr. Anthony Rossi to the stand. A ripple of confusion went through the room. Mr. Sterling, the opposing counsel, stood up, his brow furrowed. Objection, Your Honor. Mr. Rossi was not on the original witness list provided during the initial discovery phase. We filed an emergency amendment this morning at 8 o'clock. Caleb replied calmly. Given the nature of the financial discrepancies we uncovered late last night, his testimony is essential to determining the true intent behind the plaintiff's actions. Judge Sutter looked at her clerk, who nodded and handed her a fresh sheet of paper. The judge scanned it, her lips pressing into a thin line. Aloud, she said. The doors opened, and a man in a gray suit walked in. He looked nervous. He was clutching a leather portfolio as if it were a shield. He took the stand, swore the oath, and sat down, avoiding eye contact with the plaintiff's table. Please state your name and occupation for the record. Caleb said. Anthony Rossi. I am a senior loan officer at Wexford Valley Savings and Loan. Thank you. Mr. Rossi, are you familiar with the property at 412 Juniper Ridge Road? I am, Rossi said. And are you familiar with the defendant, Ms. Chloe Robinson? Rossi hesitated. He looked at me, then looked back at Caleb. I am familiar with the file under her name, yes, but I have never met Ms. Robinson in person until today. I felt a cold prickle on the back of my neck. I had banked with Wexford Valley for 10 years, but I used the downtown branch. I had never applied for a loan with a Mr. Rossi. Mr. Rossi, Caleb continued, pacing slowly in front of the witness stand. Did your bank receive an application for a financial product secured against the deed of the Juniper Ridge property within the last 3 months? Yes, sir. We received an application for a home equity line of credit, or HELOC, in the amount of $120,000. I gasped. The sound escaped me before I could stop it. $120,000. That was nearly half the value of the house before the buyout news. And who was the applicant listed on this request? Caleb asked. Chloe Robinson, Rossi said. The room seemed to tilt. I gripped the edge of the table. I had never applied for a line of credit. I had never even asked for a quote. And what was the status of this application? It was approved pending final signature, Rossi said. The credit check was run. The appraisal was waived due to the estimated equity, and the paperwork was prepared. Caleb walked back to our table and picked up a document. Mr. Rossi, I am showing you Defense Exhibit 4. This is a printout of the contact information associated with that loan application. Can you please read the email address and phone number listed for the applicant? Ms. Chloe Robinson. Rossi adjusted his glasses. The email listed is k.hartman.designs@gmail.com. The phone number ends in 4492. That is not my email, I whispered. And that is not my number. It was Kendra's. Caleb turned to look at my sister. She was not looking at the witness. She was staring at the table, her fingernails digging into the wood. So, Caleb said, his voice hard. We have a loan application in my client's name, using her social security number. But all correspondence was directed to the plaintiff. Kendra Hartman, is that correct? Yes, sir, Rossi said. Did the bank ever speak to Ms. Robinson directly? We attempted to call the number on file for verification, Rossi explained. The woman who answered identified herself as Chloe Robinson. She verified the social security number and the property address. She stated she was traveling for business and asked that all documents be sent via DocuSign to the email provided. Identity theft. It was not just a phrase anymore. It was a physical weight in the room. My sister had not just tried to sue me for the house. She had impersonated me. She had used my private information she likely got from our mother to take out a 6-figure loan against a house she did not own yet. But there is more, isn't there? Mr. Rossi, Caleb asked. A loan of that size, based on a single income, usually requires a guarantor or a co-signer, especially if the debt-to-income ratio is tight. Was there a co-signer on this application? Yes, Rossi said. Who? Rossi turned a page in his folder. Douglas Robinson. My father stood up. It was a violent motion, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. That is a lie, he shouted. His face was a mask of genuine shock. I never signed any loan, I never agreed to that. Sit down. Mr. Robinson, the bailiff, barked, stepping forward. Douglas remained standing, his chest heaving. I didn't do it. I wanted the house back in the family. Yes, but I never signed a loan note. I am not stupid. I wouldn't put my credit on the line like that. Caleb ignored the outburst. He looked at Rossi. Mr. Rossi, do you have the digital signature log for the cosigner? I do, Rossi said. He pulled out a sheet of paper that looked like a computer code log. The signature for Douglas Robinson was captured via an electronic signing platform on March 2nd at 10:30 in the morning. That is impossible, my father sputtered. I was at the golf course on March 2nd. Rossi, Caleb asked, can you tell us the IP address, the digital location from which that signature was uploaded? Rossi read from the sheet. 192.168.1.4. We cross-referenced it with the primary applicant's submission. Both signatures, the one for Chloe Robinson and the one for Douglas Robinson, came from the exact same device, within 3 minutes of each other. Caleb turned to my father. Mr. Robinson, do you share a computer with your daughter Kendra? My father looked at Kendra. The realization was dawning on him. Slow and horrific. He had not signed it. Kendra had signed it for him, just like she had signed for me. She had forged her entire family's consent to access a pot of gold that did not belong to her. Kendra, my father roared. What did you do? Kendra stood up, her composure finally shattering completely. I was fixing it, she screamed, her voice shrill and desperate. I needed the cash flow to pay off the bridge loan I took for the business. I was going to pay it back as soon as the city money came in. It was just a bridge. I was helping everyone. You forged their names. Kendra, Mr. Sterling whispered. horror written all over his face. He began to pack his briefcase. I cannot represent this. I cannot be a party to this. Kendra turned to me, her eyes wild. You asked me to do it, she shouted, pointing an accusatory finger. You told me you were overwhelmed. You said, Kendra, handle the paperwork. I don't understand the taxes. You begged me to help you. I sat there, feeling a strange sense of detachment. The pieces were all falling into place. The urgency, the lawsuit, the pressure. She was already in debt. She had spent the money in her head before she even had it, and she had dug a hole so deep she was willing to bury me to fill it. I never asked you to get a loan, I said quietly. She did, Kendra shrieked, turning to the judge. She signed a permission slip. She gave me power of attorney. Caleb walked back to our table. He looked sad, not triumphant, just sad. Your Honor, Caleb said, the plaintiff is referring to a specific incident that occurred 2 months ago. We have a text message chain from that day. He displayed a new image on the screen. It was a conversation between Kendra and me. Kendra. Hey, Mom said you are stopping by for Sunday dinner. I have some insurance papers for the house that Mom thinks we need to update. Just standard liability stuff. Can you sign them so I can file them for you? It will save you a trip to the agent. Chloe. Okay, I trust you. Thanks for handling it. I stared at the screen. I remembered that Sunday. I remembered the smell of pot roast. I remembered my mother smiling at me, pouring me tea. I remembered a stack of papers on the counter. The top page was an insurance policy summary. Underneath, there were just signature pages. Your Honor, I said, my voice trembling. I stood up. Ms. Robinson, the judge asked. I trusted them. I said, I felt the sting of tears, not from fear, but from the sheer, pathetic reality of my own naivety. That day, my mother told me it was just insurance. She said, Chloe, you are so busy. Let Kendra handle the admin. She put the papers in front of me. I didn't read the bottom layers. I just signed. I looked at my mother. She was staring at the floor, unable to lift her head. I signed a blank signature page, I admitted, because I thought that even if they didn't respect me, they wouldn't rob me. The courtroom was silent. The tragedy of it hung in the air. It wasn't a master criminal heist. It was a family preying on the trust of the one person who had always tried to please them. So, Judge Sutter said, her voice dangerously low, you signed what you thought was an insurance document, and Ms. Hartman attached that signature page to a loan application. That appears to be the case, Caleb said, and when the bank needed a co-signer, she likely did the same thing to her father, or simply clicked the button for him on his own computer while he was out. Judge Sutter looked at Kendra. The judge's face was hard, stripped of all judicial patience. Ms. Hartman, the judge said, you have not only wasted this court's time, you have engaged in a sophisticated scheme of fraud involving a federally insured financial institution. You attempted to use this court to legitimize a theft. But the city is buying the house, Kendra cried out, as if that explained everything. The money is there. It doesn't matter who signs. It is all going to the same place. It matters, the judge roared, slamming her hand down on the bench. It matters because it is not your house. It matters because you do not have the right to leverage assets that do not belong to you to cover your own debts. Sterling stood up, looking pale and sick. Your Honor, he said, his voice shaking, I must request an immediate recess. I need to advise my client regarding her rights against self-incrimination, and I need to review my own standing in this case. Judge Sutter looked at him with disdain. You are asking for a recess, she asked. I am asking for a cessation of these proceedings until criminal counsel can be retained for the plaintiff. Sterling admitted. My father looked at Kendra. He looked at the daughter he had championed, the daughter he had clapped for. You used me, he whispered. You used my name. Kendra didn't look at him. She was looking at the judge, her eyes wide with the realization that she wasn't just losing the house. She was losing her freedom. Judge Sutter gathered her files. She did not bang the gavel. She simply stood up, towering over the bench. We will recess for 1 hour, she said, but let me be very clear to everyone in this room. She looked directly at my parents, then at Kendra, and finally, she let her gaze rest on me with a look of profound apology. This is no longer just a property dispute, she said. This is a crime scene, and when I return, I expect the district attorney's office to be present. She swept out of the room. The bailiff moved to stand between Kendra and the exit. I sat back down in my chair. The adrenaline was fading, leaving me cold and empty. I looked at the binder in front of me, the receipts for the paint, the permits for the roof. I had fought to keep a house. I had ended up exposing a monster. Caleb put a hand on my shoulder. "Are you okay?" he asked. I looked at my sister, who was now sobbing hysterically into her hands while my father shouted at her, and my mother sat catatonic in her grief. "No," I said softly, "I am not okay. But I am right, and for today, that has to be enough." The recess lasted exactly 60 minutes, but it felt like a decade. When the bailiff opened the doors and called us back inside, the atmosphere in courtroom 4B had curdled. It was no longer the sharp, aggressive tension of a legal battle. It was the heavy, suffocating air of a funeral. My parents walked in first. My father, Douglas, looked as though he had aged 10 years in the hallway. His shoulders, usually pulled back in a posture of unearned confidence, were slumped. My mother, Mary Ann, had touched up her makeup, but it did nothing to hide the red blotches on her cheeks. They did not look at me. They did not look at Kendra. They looked like people who were waiting for a ceiling to collapse. Kendra entered last. She had composed herself, but it was a brittle, frantic sort of composure. Her eyes darted around the room, landing on the exit signs, the judge's bench, and finally, glaring with naked hatred at the back of my head. Her lawyer, Mr. Sterling, returned as well, though he sat at the very edge of his chair, creating a distinct physical distance between himself and his client. Judge Sutter resumed her seat. She did not waste time with formalities. "We are back on the record," she said. "Mr. Raines, before we address the serious revelations regarding the bank fraud, you indicated you had one final piece of evidence regarding the estate of the late Lillian Robinson. Please proceed." Caleb stood up. He didn't pick up a laptop or a remote control this time. He picked up the thick, white envelope I had found in the lockbox, the one with Lillian's spiky handwriting on the front. "Your Honor," Caleb said, his voice quiet and respectful. "Throughout this trial, the plaintiff has characterized the late Lillian Robinson as a confused elderly woman who left a dilapidated house to the wrong niece by mistake. They have argued that her will was a burden that the family needed to fix." He walked to the bench and handed the envelope to the bailiff. "This is a sealed addendum to Lillian Robinson's estate planning," Caleb continued. "It was found in a lockbox in the defendant's possession. The outside of the envelope reads, 'For Chloe if they ever take you to court.'" A murmur rippled through the gallery. Kendra's head snapped up. If Judge Sutter asked, taking the envelope. "Lillian was a perceptive woman," Caleb said. "She knew her family. She knew that the house on Juniper Ridge Road was going to be valuable, even before the official city announcement, and she knew that her brother and her eldest niece would likely try to challenge her decision to leave it to Chloe." Caleb turned to face the room. "This envelope contains a copy of the city option notice we discussed earlier, proving Lillian knew about the buyout, but it also contains a secondary testament, a conditional codicil to her will." "What are you talking about?" Kendra snapped. "There is no codicil. The will was probated 2 years ago." "This is a testamentary trust document," Caleb corrected her. "It was set up to trigger only under specific conditions. Your Honor, if you would please read the section marked, 'The Peacekeeper Clause.'" Judge Sutter opened the document. She adjusted her glasses, and as she read, her eyebrows climbed higher and higher. "This is unexpected," the judge murmured. "Read it, please," Caleb said. Judge Sutter cleared her throat. She read Lillian's words into the record. "I, Lillian Robinson, being of sound mind, hereby establish the Robinson Family Legacy Fund. This fund, consisting of my accumulated stock portfolio and bonds, currently valued at approximately $400,000, is to be held in trust." $400,000. I heard my mother gasp. It was a sharp, wet sound. Kendra's mouth fell open. They had no idea. Lillian lived like a pauper. She wore flannel shirts and drove a 20-year-old truck. They thought the house was the only thing she had. "This fund," the judge continued reading, "is to be distributed as follows: $100,000 to my brother, Douglas, $100,000 to my sister-in-law, Mary Ann, $100,000 to my niece, Kendra, and the remaining balance to my niece, Chloe. This distribution is intended to ensure that everyone in the family feels provided for." My father sat up straight. A look of desperate hope washed over his face. $100,000. It was a lifeline. I could see him doing the math in his head, paying off debts, fixing the mess they were in. "However," Judge Sutter said. Her voice changed. It became harder. "There is a condition." She flipped the page. "This distribution is subject to a strict no-contest clause. If any beneficiary named above challenges the primary distribution of my real estate assets specifically, the bequest of the house at 412 Juniper Ridge Road to Chloe Robinson, or attempts to legally alter the ownership of said property through litigation, coercion, or any other legal instrument, they shall immediately forfeit their entire share of this legacy fund. The silence in the room was absolute. It was the silence of a bomb that had just detonated, leaving a vacuum where the air used to be. Judge Sutter looked up from the paper. In the event of such a challenge, she finished reading, the forfeited shares shall be consolidated and donated in full to the Wexford Glen Historical Society for the preservation of local architecture. Caleb looked at my family. By filing this lawsuit, Caleb said gently. By dragging Chloe into court to fight for a house you claimed was a burden, you didn't just fail to steal her property. You successfully disqualified yourselves from inheriting $300,000 in cash. No, Kendra whispered. Her face was the color of chalk. No, that's not, she can't do that. She did it, Caleb said. Lillian predicted that your greed would outweigh your gratitude. She gave you a choice. You could have respected her wishes and walked away with a check for $100,000 each. Instead, you wanted it all, and now you get nothing. My mother let out a wail. It wasn't a cry. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated ruin. She grabbed my father's arm, shaking him. Douglas, she cried. The money. We lost the money. My father stared at the judge, his mouth working silently. He looked like a man watching a ship sink with everything he owned on board. Judge Sutter looked at Kendra. Ms. Hartman, she asked, her voice tinged with a dark curiosity. Did you know about this fund? No, Kendra screamed. She stood up, knocking her chair over. She never told us. That old hag never told us she had money. She dressed like a hobo. How were we supposed to know? You weren't supposed to know, I said. I spoke for the first time in an hour. My voice was steady, cutting through the chaos. That was the test. Kendra, Lillian wanted to know if you were capable of being a sister, or if you were just a vulture. I think we have the answer. You knew, Kendra shrieked, pointing at me. You knew and you let us walk into this trap. I found out today, I said. Just like you. The difference is, I didn't need a bribe to respect her wishes. My mother was sobbing uncontrollably now. We needed that money, she moaned. We needed it so bad. Oh God, Douglas, what are we going to do? Why? I asked, looking at my parents. Why did you need it so bad? You have your pension. Dad, you have the house in the suburbs. Why was it so important to take mine? My father wouldn't answer. He just put his head in his hands. But my mother looked at me. Her eyes were red and swollen, and for the first time, the mask of the perfect suburban matriarch was completely gone. In its place was a terrified woman. There is no pension. Chloe, she whispered. I froze. What? The business Kendra's business, my mother stammered, tears streaming down her face. She made some bad investments 3 years ago. She was going to lose everything. Her house, her car. We wanted to help. We thought she just needed a bridge loan. She took a shuddering breath. We mortgaged our house, she confessed. We took out everything, and then she lost that too. We are months behind. Chloe, the bank is calling every day. We are going to lose our home. I looked at Kendra. She wasn't looking at me. She was looking at the floor, biting her lip. So that's what this was, I said. The realization hit me like a physical blow. The buyout, the city project. It was a lifeline, my father said, his voice muffled by his hands. When we saw the email about the eminent domain about the premium payout, we thought it was a miracle. If we could just get Kendra on the deed, half the money would have paid off our mortgage. It would have saved us. And what about me? I asked. The question hung there. What about me? Dad, if Kendra took half, and you took the rest to pay your debts, where was I supposed to go? What was I supposed to do with half a house I couldn't afford to keep, and no money to move? You're resourceful, my mother sobbed. You always figure things out. You're single. You don't have a family to support. We thought you would be fine. I am the family, I yelled. My voice cracked. And finally, the tears I had been holding back for 6 months spilled over. I am your daughter, but you didn't see me. You saw an asset. You saw a piggy bank you could break open to save your favorite child. I walked toward the railing. You stood up here and called me fragile, I said, my voice shaking with rage. You told this court I was unstable, You told them I couldn't handle the pressure, but the truth is, you didn't care if I was fragile. You didn't care if I was happy. You only called my phone when you realized my house was going to turn into cash. I wiped my face with the back of my hand. You call me the responsible one because it's convenient. I told them, it means you don't have to worry about me. It means you can use all your energy protecting Kendra. Well, look where that got you. You protected her right into a felony charge, and you protected yourselves out of an inheritance that would have solved all your problems. Chloe, please, my mother begged. We can fix this. We can drop the suit. Maybe the judge can invalidate the clause. She looked at Judge Sutter with desperate eyes. Your Honor, if we withdraw if we say it was a mistake. Judge Sutter looked at my mother with a mixture of pity and disgust. The clause was triggered the moment you filed the affidavit. Mrs. Robinson, the judge said coldly, you cannot unring a bell. The court accepts the validity of Lillian Robinson's trust. The funds are forfeited. Kendra let out a sound that was half scream, half laugh. It was the sound of someone snapping. Fine, she yelled. Keep the money. Keep the stupid money. It was probably nothing anyway. That old witch didn't have $400,000. She was a hoarder. She saved tinfoil. She was a miserable, lonely old woman who hated everyone because she couldn't get a husband. The courtroom went deadly silent. Kendra was panting, her face twisted and ugly. She had forgotten where she was. She had forgotten the good sister act. She was just a spoiled child who had been told no for the first time in her life. She hated us. Kendra ranted, pacing back and forth. That's why she left the house to Chloe. Because Chloe is just like her boring, pathetic, a spinster who cares more about sanding floors than having a life. She did this to spite me. Ms. Hartman, the judge shouted. She was a bitch, Kendra screamed. A selfish, manipulative old... Enough. The judge's gavel came down with a force that sounded like a gunshot. Bailiff, Judge Sutter said, her voice trembling with suppressed anger. Remove the plaintiff from my courtroom immediately. Place her in holding until the district attorney arrives. 2 bailiffs moved forward. Kendra looked around, blinking, as if waking up from a trance. She saw the officers approaching. She saw the horror on our parents' faces. She saw the ruin she had caused. Wait, she stammered. Wait, I didn't mean... Move, the bailiff said, grabbing her arm. They dragged her out. She didn't fight, but she looked back at me one last time. There was no anger left in her eyes, just fear. My parents sat alone at their table. My mother had her head on the desk, weeping into her arms. My father was staring at the empty chair where Kendra had been sitting. Caleb closed the folder on his desk. He looked at me. I think, he said quietly, that is everything. I looked at the envelope in the judge's hand. Lillian had won. She had reached out from beyond the grave and exposed them for exactly who they were. She had offered them a gift, and they had slapped it away because their hands were too full of greed to catch it. I felt a strange lightness in my chest. The weight of their expectations. The weight of being the responsible one. The weight of their conditional love, it was all gone. They had sold me out for a chance at a payout, and in doing so, they had set me free. Judge Sutter took a deep breath. She looked tired. She looked at the papers in front of her, then at me. Ms. Robinson, she said. I am sorry you had to go through this. Thank you, Your Honor, I whispered. We will proceed to the ruling, she said. I have seen enough. The bailiff returned to his post, and the heavy wooden doors swung shut, sealing the fate of the Robinson family inside the 4 walls of the courtroom. The air was no longer electric. It was scorched. The ozone smell of a storm that had already struck and destroyed everything in its path. Judge Eliana Sutter did not look at the clock. She did not look at the gallery. She arranged the stack of files in front of her with a deliberate, terrifying slowness. She uncapped her fountain pen, made a final note, and then clasped her hands together. Please rise, the bailiff said. We stood. My legs felt like lead, heavy and solid, rooting me to the floor. Across the aisle, my parents stood up. But they were not the same people who had walked in that morning. My father, Douglas, was leaning heavily on the table, his face a landscape of ruin. My mother, Marianne, was trembling, clutching a handkerchief that was now stained with mascara and tears. The chair between them, where Kendra had sat, was empty. Be seated, Judge Sutter said. We sat. I am ready to issue my ruling, the judge began. Her voice was stripped of all theatricality. It was the voice of the law, cold, impartial. and absolute. In the matter of Hartman versus Robinson, case number CV20240911, regarding the ownership of the property at 412 Juniper Ridge Road, she looked at the empty chair. The court finds that the plaintiff, Kendra Hartman, has failed to provide any credible evidence of a verbal or written contract regarding shared ownership. The document presented as Exhibit A has been proven, through forensic metadata and expert analysis, to be a fabrication created months after the alleged date of signing. Furthermore, the use of an expired notary stamp indicates a deliberate and clumsy attempt to defraud this court. She turned her gaze to me. Therefore, the plaintiff's request for a declaratory judgment and constructive trust is denied in its entirety. The court affirms that Ms. Chloe Robinson is the sole, legal, and exclusive owner of the property in question, pursuant to the valid last will and testament of Lillian Robinson. I let out a breath I felt like I had been holding for 2 years. My shoulders dropped. It was over. The house was safe. But Judge Sutter was not finished. However, she continued, her voice hardening, this court cannot ignore what transpired here today. We have witnessed evidence of identity theft, bank fraud, and the forgery of legal instruments. These are not civil matters. These are felonies. My mother let out a small, strangled whimper. I am directing the court clerk to forward the entire transcript of these proceedings, along with all exhibits, specifically the forged loan applications and the fabricated contract, to the Office of the District Attorney for immediate review, Judge Sutter declared. I am also recommending that a criminal investigation be opened regarding the conduct of Kendra Hartman and any potential accomplices in the procurement of the fraudulent loans. Any potential accomplices. The judge looked directly at my father. He shrank under her gaze, looking like a child who had broken a window and was waiting for the punishment. He knew, and I knew, that the digital signature on the loan co-signed by him would be traced. Whether he signed it or Kendra signed it for him, his negligence and his greed had implicated him in a federal crime. Furthermore, the judge said, turning her attention to Mr. Sterling, Counselor, you presented a document to this court that was demonstrably forged. While I accept that you may have been misled by your client, your failure to vet the provenance of such a suspicious document is noted on the record. I will be forwarding a complaint to the State Bar Association for review of your due diligence protocols. Sterling went pale. He stood up, buttoning his jacket with shaking hands. Understood, Your Honor. Finally, Judge Sutter said, looking at me. Ms. Robinson. Yes, Your Honor. I said, I am issuing a permanent restraining order against Kendra Hartman. She is to have no contact with you, directly or indirectly. She is not to come within 500 feet of your home or your place of employment. Given the financial predation we have seen today, I am also suggesting you lock your credit and conduct a full audit of your accounts. She paused, and her expression softened. Just for a moment. You have defended your home, Ms. Robinson. I hope you find some peace in it. She banged the gavel. Case closed. The sound was final. It echoed off the mahogany walls, signaling the end of the war. Mr. Sterling did not look at my parents. He packed his briefcase with frantic speed and practically ran out of the courtroom, likely rushing to distance himself from the radioactive fallout of the Robinson family. I stood up and began to pack my binder. My hands were shaking, not from fear, but from the adrenaline crash. I felt lightheaded. My parents remained seated. They looked paralyzed. They had walked in here expecting a victory lap, expecting to strip me of my assets to save themselves from their own financial incompetence. Instead, they had lost everything. They had lost the lawsuit. They had lost the inheritance from Aunt Lillian. They had lost their reputation. And very soon, they might lose their freedom. I picked up my binder and turned to leave. I had to walk past them to get to the aisle. I didn't look down. I kept my eyes on the double doors at the back of the room. Chloe? The voice was weak. It was my mother. I stopped. I didn't turn my body, just my head. She was looking up at me, her eyes red and desperate. She reached out a hand, as if to touch my sleeve, but stopped short. Chloe, wait, she whispered. We need to go home. We need to sit down and figure this out. The district attorney, if you talk to them, if you tell them it was just a misunderstanding. I looked at her hand. It was the same hand that had signed the affidavit calling me unstable. It was the same hand that had clapped when Kendra declared my house was hers. There is nothing to figure out, I said. We are your parents, my father croaked. His voice was raspy. You can't let them take us to jail. You can't let them ruin Kendra. She has children. Kendra ruined Kendra, I said calmly. And you helped her. We were trying to survive, my mother cried. We are drowning. Chloe, we are going to lose our house. Then I suggest you learn how to rent, I said. I hear the market is competitive. I walked away. I walked down the aisle. The sound of my heels clicking on the floor. The only sound in the room. I pushed open the heavy doors and stepped out into the hallway. The hallway was crowded with people waiting for other cases. Lawyers on phones. Bailiffs moving prisoners. Near the elevators, I saw Kendra. She had been released from the holding cell, likely pending formal charges. She was standing with Mr. Sterling, who was shouting at her in a hushed, furious whisper. Her hair was messy, her expensive cardigan was wrinkled, and her face was streaked with tears. When she saw me, she shoved past her lawyer. She marched toward me, her eyes wild with a mixture of terror and rage. "You think you won?" she screamed, her voice echoing off the marble walls. People stopped to look. "You think you are special now? You are nothing. You are just a selfish, lonely bitch who stole my money. You ruined this family." I stopped. I looked at her. I looked at the sister I had spent 30 years trying to please. I looked at the woman I had shared a bedroom with, the woman I had covered for, the woman I had loved. I felt absolutely nothing. The anger was gone. The hurt was gone. There was only a vast, empty space where my sister used to be. "I didn't win," I said, my voice quiet but clear enough for her to hear. I just finally stopped losing myself. I turned my back on her. "I hate you," she screamed after me. "I hope you rot in that house. I hope it falls down on top of you." I kept walking. I walked out of the courthouse, past the security checkpoint, and into the cool, gray afternoon. The rain had stopped. The air smelled of wet pavement and ozone. I got into my car and drove. I didn't go to Northgate Meridian Claims. I didn't go to a bar to celebrate. I drove straight to Wexford Glen. When I turned onto Juniper Ridge Road, the sun was just starting to break through the clouds. The light hit the river, turning the gray water into a ribbon of silver. I pulled into the driveway of number 412. The house sat there, solid and unmoving. The paint I had applied was drying in the sun. The roof I had patched was holding strong. It wasn't a mansion. It wasn't a palace. It was a craftsman bungalow with a squeaky porch step and a drafty hallway. But it was mine. I unlocked the front door and stepped inside. The silence of the house welcomed me. It wasn't the lonely silence my father had warned me about. It was the silence of peace. It was the silence of a space that no longer needed to be defended. I walked into the kitchen. I ran my hand over the backsplash tiles I had cut and placed with my own fingers. I remembered the night I installed them, listening to a podcast, drinking cheap wine, feeling exhausted but proud. They had tried to take this feeling from me. They had tried to tell me I was too weak to own my own labor. I went to the living room and opened the windows. The fresh river breeze blew in, chasing away the stale air of the courtroom. I thought about the money. The buyout was real. The city announced the project formally 2 weeks later. The letter came in the mail, offering exactly what Caleb had predicted, 150% of the market value, plus a relocation bonus. It was a staggering amount of money, combined with the portion of Aunt Lillian's trust that had been forfeited by my family. I was suddenly a wealthy woman. I didn't buy a yacht. I didn't move to a penthouse in the city. I took the buyout, and I negotiated a timeline that allowed me to stay in the house for 6 more months before the demolition crews arrived. I spent those 6 months saying goodbye to the place that had saved me, and then I created the Lillian Robinson Grant. I used the money to start a foundation. It was a small fund, designed specifically to help single women divorced, widowed, or just independent secure down payments for their first homes. The application process was simple. No credit checks, no character witnesses from parents. Just a question: what would owning your own home mean to you? It wasn't revenge. Revenge is static. It keeps you tied to the people who hurt you. This was transformation. I was taking the greed that had destroyed my family and turning it into the very thing they had tried to deny me independence. On my last night in the house, I sat on the porch steps, drinking a cup of Earl Grey tea, just like Lillian used to do. My phone buzzed on the step next to me. I looked at the screen. It was a text from my father. "Chloe, please, the DA is filing charges tomorrow. We need to talk. We are family." I looked at the words. We are family. They had used that word like a weapon for as long as I could remember. They used it to silence me, to rob me, and to erase me. They thought family meant obligation. They thought it meant I owed them my life. I picked up the phone. I could have replied. I could have told them that actions have consequences. I could have told them that I hoped their lawyer was better than the one they used for the fraud, but I didn't. I realized that explaining myself to them was just another form of begging to be heard, and I was done begging. I turned the phone over, placing it face down on the wood. I sipped my tea. I listened to the river. I listened to the wind in the trees. For the first time in 34 years, the only voice I needed to hear was my own. I didn't block them. I just didn't answer. And in that silence, I found the only victory that mattered. Thank you so much for listening to my story. It was a long journey from that courtroom to where I am now, but I am stronger for it. I would love to know where you are tuning in from. Please drop a comment below and let me know which country or city you are listening from. And share your thoughts on whether you think I did the right thing by walking away. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to the Maya Revenge Stories channel, like this video, and hit that hype button so we can share this message of independence with more people. Stay strong, and remember your life belongs to you.